Welcome. What you are about to watch is not science fiction, and it is not folklore. It is a serious investigation into one of history's most compelling unresolved questions: the mystery of Easter Island, the civilization that devoured itself. Across the world, in universities, research institutes, and field excavations, serious scholars are wrestling with evidence that does not fit the accepted story. Evidence that has been documented, measured, and peer-reviewed, and that still has no satisfying conventional explanation. We are going to look at that evidence carefully, without prejudice in either direction. Not dismissing what is extraordinary, but not accepting it without scrutiny either. The truth, as always, is in the details. When Dutch explorer Jacob Roggeveen arrived at Easter Island on Easter Sunday 1722, he found approximately 3,000 people living in desperate poverty on a treeless, windswept rock in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. Scattered across the island were 887 enormous stone statues, some standing nearly 10 meters tall, weighing up to 82 tons, staring inland with their backs to the sea. Many had been toppled. The forest that had once covered the entire island was completely gone. Pollen cores drilled from the island's crater lakes tell a story that shocked the archaeological world. When the first Polynesian settlers arrived around 1200 AD, Easter Island was covered in a dense palm forest. Over the next 400 years, tree by tree, the forest was cleared. By 1600, not a single large tree remained. Without timber, the islanders could not build canoes to fish offshore. Without canoes, the protein supply collapsed. Without trees to bind the soil, erosion destroyed agricultural productivity. A population that may have reached 15,000 crashed to 3,000 in what appears to be one of the most complete self-inflicted ecological collapses in human history. But was it? New evidence suggests the story we have told for 40 years may be dangerously incomplete. Who really destroyed Easter Island, and why does the answer still matter? This is where our investigation begins. Stay with us, because the further we go into the evidence, the more extraordinary it becomes. The story you think you know is only the surface. Beneath it lies something far more remarkable. Let us begin. Before we examine the specific evidence, we need to step back and understand the context. This case does not exist in isolation. It sits within the broader phenomenon of lost civilizations, and to properly evaluate what we are looking at, we need to understand the broader picture that surrounds it. For as long as human beings have told stories, they have told stories about what was lost. Every great culture on Earth carries myths of a golden age, a time before the current order, when civilization stood taller, knew more, and reached further than anything that came after. For centuries, scholars categorized these stories as allegory, comforting fictions invented by cultures to explain the gap between their aspirations and their achievements. But a quiet revolution in archaeology, geology, and oceanography has changed that calculus. The evidence now accumulating from seafloors, ice cores, and ancient texts is demanding a fundamental revision of the human story, one in which the line between myth and memory is far thinner than we imagined. The conventional timeline of civilization holds that complex urban society first emerged in Mesopotamia around 3500 BC. Before that, scattered farming villages, nomadic hunter-gatherers, and nothing more. But this tidy narrative has been challenged repeatedly by anomalous discoveries that do not fit the accepted sequence. Megalithic structures dated to 10,000 BC or earlier. Astronomical alignments encoded in monuments by cultures supposedly too primitive to understand the sky. Mathematical ratios embedded in architecture that would not be formally derived for thousands of years. These discoveries are not fringe fabrications. They are measured, published, and debated in peer-reviewed literature. They point toward a past far more complex than the textbooks describe. What happens when a civilization falls? Most of its knowledge disappears. The libraries burn, the engineers die, the farmers abandon the fields. Within a generation or two, the grandchildren of architects are living in the ruins of buildings they cannot build. We know this happened in the Bronze Age collapse of 1200 BC, when a networked civilization spanning the Mediterranean was destroyed in a matter of decades. We know it from the fall of Rome. History is not a steady march of progress. It is punctuated by catastrophic resets, after which humanity must begin again. The question is whether some of those resets happened far earlier than we know, and whether their traces are still waiting to be found beneath our feet. This context matters because it tells us something important. What we are about to investigate is not an isolated curiosity. It is part of a pattern that researchers in multiple fields have been independently documenting for decades, and patterns in science demand explanation. With that foundation in place, let us now turn to the specific case at hand. Now we reach the heart of the matter, the core evidence surrounding Easter Island. The civilization that devoured itself is more extensive, more verified, and more troubling for conventional explanations than most people realize. Let us walk through it systematically, fact by fact, and allow the evidence to speak for itself. We are not going to speculate here. Every point that follows is documented in peer-reviewed publications, official archaeological records, or government archives that are publicly accessible. The question is not whether these facts are real. The question is what they mean. Consider this first extraordinary detail. Easter Island, known to its inhabitants as Rapa Nui, was settled by Polynesian voyagers from the Marquesas Islands or the Society Islands at some point between 1100 and 1300 AD. The settlers brought chickens, rats, and the sweet potato, the last of which has been confirmed by DNA analysis to be of South American origin, suggesting pre-European contact between Polynesia and South America that has transformed understanding of Pacific exploration. This single data point, if taken in isolation, might be set aside. Anomalies happen, instruments malfunction, researchers make mistakes. But as we continue, you will see that this is not an isolated anomaly. It is part of a consistent and documented pattern. But that is only the beginning. Researchers also discovered the 887 moai statues carved from the volcanic tuff of the Rano Raraku quarry range in height from 2 to 10 meters, with the largest weighing 82 tons. An unfinished statue at the quarry would have weighed over 270 tons if completed. The statues were originally erected on stone platforms called ahu and fitted with red stone top knots and white coral eyes. All standing moai were eventually toppled, most between 1722 and 1863, in interclan conflicts documented by early European visitors. Now, a skeptic might propose an alternative explanation for this, and that is entirely reasonable. We should always test alternative explanations before accepting extraordinary ones. The problem is that the alternative explanations, when examined carefully, create more problems than they solve. The mystery deepens when we examine pollen cores extracted from Easter Island's crater lakes by John Flenley and Paul Bahn in the 1980s demonstrated that the island was once covered by a dense palm forest dominated by the Easter Island palm, a species related to the Chilean wine palm. The pollen record shows deforestation beginning around 1200 AD and accelerating dramatically after 1400 AD, with the last tree pollen disappearing by approximately 1650, correlating with the period of maximum moai construction. This is where the conventional account begins to strain. Each individual fact might be dismissed or minimized in isolation. But the cumulative weight of the evidence is another matter entirely. Perhaps most remarkable of all, population estimates for Easter Island at its pre-collapse peak range from 6,000 to 15,000, making it one of the most densely populated Polynesian islands. When Roggeveen arrived in 1722, he encountered approximately 3,000 people. European contact initiated a second, faster collapse. Peruvian slave raiders abducted approximately 1,500 people in 1862, including virtually all of the island's literate population who could read the Rongorongo script. eliminating the possibility of ever deciphering it from native speakers. Researchers who have examined this evidence have described it as genuinely difficult to explain within the accepted framework. These are not fringe commentators. They are credentialed academics publishing in mainstream journals, raising questions that the field has not yet satisfactorily answered. Then there is the matter of experiments conducted by archaeologist Terry Hunt and Carl Lipo in 2012 demonstrated that the Moai statues could be walked upright by teams of people using ropes, requiring no sledges, rollers, or large numbers of workers. The technique was described in local oral tradition. Islanders say the statues walked and matches the wear patterns on the bases of transported statues. If the statues walked, far less timber would have been needed for transport, undermining the direct link between statue building and deforestation. What makes this particularly significant is its independence from the previous points. This is not a case of one theory requiring another. These are separate lines of evidence converging on the same uncomfortable conclusion. Adding to the enigma is this finding: the Rongorongo script, found on 26 surviving wooden tablets and objects, remains undeciphered despite intensive study. It is one of very few writing systems in history to have developed independently, possibly after Rapa Nui people saw Spanish treaty documents during the 1770 Spanish visit. The loss of literate islanders to Peruvian slave raids in 1862 destroyed the living transmission of the script's meaning, making it likely to remain permanently unreadable without a bilingual key. Taken together, these facts form a pattern that cannot be explained by coincidence, misidentification, or methodological error. Each piece of evidence has been examined by skeptics. Each has been subjected to alternative explanations. And in each case, the alternative explanation falls short of accounting for everything that has been documented. We are left with a body of evidence that demands explanation and an accepted narrative that does not provide one. This is where serious inquiry begins. Now that we have established the evidence, we need to examine the theories that researchers have proposed to explain Easter Island, the civilization that devoured itself. This is where the debate becomes most intense, because the theories reflect not just different interpretations of the same evidence, but fundamentally different assumptions about what is possible and what the past looked like. Understanding these theories is not just an academic exercise. Each one has been championed by serious researchers with genuine credentials, and each one captures something that the others miss. The truth, if it is ever established, will likely draw on elements of several. The first major explanation proposed by researchers holds that Jared Diamond's ecocide hypothesis, popularized in his 2005 book Collapse, argues that the Rapa Nui people deliberately cut down their forest to transport the Moai statues, producing an ecological suicide that destroyed their civilization from within. The theory has been enormously influential and fits the Pollen record. The main objection is that rational people with no alternative island to flee to would not have continued cutting trees once the consequences became obvious, and the walking Moai theory reduces the timber requirement dramatically. This interpretation has significant academic support and is backed by substantial evidence, but it is not without problems. Critics point out that it requires assumptions that go beyond what the evidence strictly supports, and that key predictions of this theory have not been confirmed by subsequent research. It remains contested, and the contest is productive. A rival school of thought argues that Terry Hunt of the University of Arizona and Carl Lipo of Cal State Long Beach argue in their 2011 book, The Statues That Walked That Introduced Pacific Rats, which arrived with the colonists, were the primary agents of deforestation, eating palm seeds before they could germinate and preventing forest regeneration. On this model, the islanders were victims of an ecological accident rather than architects of their own destruction. The main objection is that rat predation on seeds alone cannot account for the speed and completeness of deforestation shown in the Pollen record. This theory is controversial and deliberately so. Its proponents argue that the evidence demands an explanation outside the conventional framework. Critics counter that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and that the evidence presented, while suggestive, does not yet meet that standard. The debate continues in peer-reviewed literature. Perhaps the most unconventional theory suggests that historians, including Stacey Ethereddy and others, argue the primary collapse of Rapa Nui society was caused not by ecological suicide, but by European contact. Introduced diseases, slave raids, and colonial violence, not deforestation. The island's population may have been broadly stable before 1722, despite the forest loss, with islanders adapting through lithic mulching agriculture. The main objection is that the pollen and population data indicate stress predating European contact. What is striking about this debate is not merely that experts disagree. That is normal and healthy in science. What is striking is the quality of the disagreement. Serious researchers, working from the same body of evidence, reaching genuinely different conclusions. That level of fundamental disagreement, when it persists over decades, is a signal that something important has not yet been understood. The question is not which of these theories is right. The question is whether any of them is right, or whether the truth is something that none of the current frameworks has yet been able to capture. The case surrounding Easter Island, the civilization that devoured itself, does not rest on speculation alone. What distinguishes this investigation from pure mythology is the existence of documented, physical, verifiable evidence, material that has been examined by credentialed researchers and whose authenticity is not seriously disputed. What is disputed is its interpretation. Let us review the most significant documented evidence as objectively as possible. We are not going to cherry-pick the data that supports a preferred conclusion. We are going to lay out what exists and let you draw your own assessment. Physical evidence supporting this account includes pollen cores from Rano Kau and Rano Raraku craters, drilled and analyzed by palynologists John Flenley and Sarah King, show a dramatic and near-total decline in Easter Island palm pollen between 1400 and 1650 AD, with simultaneous increases in fern spores and grass pollen consistent with open, eroded landscape. The cores also record a rise in charcoal particles, confirming deliberate burning. This physical record in lake sediment is the primary evidence for the timeline and scale of deforestation on the island. This evidence has been subjected to independent verification. Skeptics have examined it. Alternative explanations have been proposed and tested. The data remains. The question of what it means remains open. Investigators have documented rat bone assemblages recovered from Rapa Nui archaeological middens and dated by Terry Hunt's team confirm that Polynesian rats arrived with the first settlers and immediately began reproducing without predators. Nor marks on recovered palm nuts are consistent with rat predation. The rat population would have reached carrying capacity within decades of arrival, creating an additional deforestation pressure alongside deliberate clearing and providing the ecological mechanism for Hunt and Lipo's alternative collapse model. This evidence has been subjected to independent verification. Skeptics have examined it. Alternative explanations have been proposed and tested. The data remains. The question of what it means remains open. On-site analysis revealed DNA analysis published in 2020 by a team led by Alexander Ionides of Stanford University confirmed pre-European genetic contact between Polynesian people and indigenous South Americans, with the mixing event dated to approximately 1200 AD and geographically centered near Rapa Nui. This finding confirms that Easter Islanders were sailing to South America and back, an extraordinary feat of open ocean navigation, and fundamentally changes the picture of Rapa Nui isolation used to underpin the ecocide narrative. This evidence has been subjected to independent verification. Skeptics have examined it. Alternative explanations have been proposed and tested. The data remains. The question of what it means remains open. Each individual piece of evidence might, in principle, be explained away. A single anomalous artifact might be misidentified. A single anomalous date might reflect contamination. A single anomalous eyewitness account might reflect misperception. The question is whether all of the evidence can be explained away, and whether the explanations required are more or less plausible than the evidence itself. When multiple independent lines of inquiry converge on the same conclusion, that convergence is the most powerful signal in empirical science. And that is exactly what we are seeing here. We have examined the history, the evidence, and the theories surrounding Easter Island, the civilization that devoured itself. Now we need to ask the question that is sometimes overlooked in discussions of ancient mysteries. Why does this matter? What does it mean for us today? It would be easy to file this away as an interesting historical curiosity, a puzzle from a distant past with no bearing on our present lives. That would be a fundamental mistake. The questions raised by this case touch on issues that are directly relevant to who we are, where we came from, and what the human story actually looks like before the period covered by conventional history. Hunt and Lepos, the statues that walked, reframed the Easter Island collapse as a story of ecological accident and European impact rather than deliberate self-destruction. The 2020 Stanford DNA study confirming Polynesian American contact demolished the assumption of total pre-European isolation. The Rongorongo script remains undeciphered, and without a bilingual key, it is likely to stay that way permanently. Easter Island is now a UNESCO World Heritage Site, but erosion, tourism pressure, and a dwindling indigenous Rapa Nui community who have campaigned for decades for greater autonomy from Chile represent an ongoing second collapse that the academic debate about the first tends to overshadow. Furthermore, the tools available to investigate these questions are advancing rapidly. Satellite imaging, ground-penetrating radar, ancient DNA analysis, isotopic tracing, and deep-sea sonar are all providing capabilities that previous generations of researchers could only dream of. Cases that were genuinely unresolvable 10 years ago are now open to new analysis. And the findings, consistently, are expanding rather than contracting the mystery. The investigation continues. New discoveries are being made. New analyses are being published. New voices are entering the conversation from disciplines that were not previously part of the discussion. The answers, when they come, and they will come, will not merely solve a historical puzzle. They will force a fundamental revision of assumptions that underpin our entire understanding of human history and human potential. We have now walked through the complete case of Easter Island, the civilization that devoured itself, from the historical record, through the physical evidence, across the competing theories, and into the modern significance of what remains unresolved. What the story of Easter Island ultimately reveals is not just a historical puzzle. It is a mirror. It reflects our assumptions back at us, our assumptions about what ancient people were capable of, about how knowledge is gained and lost across the centuries, and about the relationship between what we know and what we merely think we know. The evidence presented in this documentary is real. The questions it raises are genuine. The debate among researchers is ongoing, and that is healthy. Science is not a set of conclusions. It is a process. And the process requires that we remain open to evidence that challenges what we thought we knew, however uncomfortable that challenge might be. If you came to this documentary as a skeptic, we hope the evidence gave you something to think about. If you came as a true believer, we hope the critical examination gave you a more nuanced picture. The truth, as always, lies in the evidence, not in what we want to be true. Thank you for watching. If this investigation sparked your curiosity, please subscribe to the channel. We publish new documentaries every week, covering the full range of historical mysteries that the mainstream has not yet adequately explained. Leave a comment below telling us which case you want us to investigate next. The conversation continues. The investigation never ends.